The winter meetings are over, but the trade speculation has just begun. Who are some pitchers the Mets could target on the market? Which players could be on the move for the Mets roster? We're going to talk about it all on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Before we start to talk about trades, it is worth mentioning this. Juan Soto is officially a New York Met. The contract is signed. He passed his physical. He'll be introduced to the media today at 3 p.m. We'll talk about the structure of the deal a little bit because we actually learned the exact breakdown of the contract. So I'll go through those numbers in the final segment, and we'll sort of get you ready a little bit for what is to come. But that'll be our last segment to close out the show. I want to start things off focusing on what happened at the winter meetings. One of the big trades that we were talking about for the Mets will now not happen because Garrett Crochet has been moved from the White Sox to the Red Sox, very similar to Chris Sale back in the day, a left-handed ace from the White Sox getting traded to Boston. This package included 4 prospects. 2 of them were top 100 guys, catcher Kyle Teal and outfielder Braden Montgomery, and then 2 other prospects were in the package. For comparison, the Mets, when it comes to their top 100 guys, you're looking at Jet Williams, Brandon Sproat, Ryan Clifford. Some sites still have Drew Gilbert as a top 100 prospect. Others have dropped him off. I know it's just baseball. We dropped him off after his injury-plagued year. Luis Acuna has pretty much dropped off of most top 100 prospect lists. So for the Mets to put 2 top 100 prospects on the table for Crochet, they would have had to give up Jet Williams and Ryan Clifford, something like that. And personally, I would not have been on that. Carson Bench, probably another top 100 prospect the Mets have. Wouldn't trade him either. The 3 prospects I would be holding closest to the vest at this stage are those 3. It's Jet Williams, Ryan Clifford, and Carson Bench. And I feel like you'd have had to give up at least 1, if not 2 of those guys, plus more on top of it. It just never made sense to me for the Mets to get in on a Crochet when you can just spend money to fill out that rotation. So personally, I'm actually okay with this trade having gone down and the Mets not landing them. I think there are other things they can do in the market that make a lot more sense that won't be as steep of a price to acquire that particular pitcher. Now, the Mets checked on Nick Pivetta today. Another move I'm not a fan of just because he got a qualifying offer tendered to him. He's pitched to an ERA over 4 the last couple of years. He does have great stuff. There is a potential frontline pitcher there if you unlock him. But I also want to see some results, and that's why I wouldn't necessarily love them at signing Pivetta, giving up the draft picks and everything else for a guy that has that qualifying offer attached. There are a lot of starting pitchers that are potentially on the market, though, and that's what I wanted to start the show with here, running through the names that are still out there. Surprising report today that the Pirates are open to trading Mitch Keller and very open to Jared Jones as they are searching for offense. They have an ace, Paul Skeens, guy that could be the best pitcher in baseball next year. He has to have some other starters in that rotation. I don't get gutting your rotation to prop up your lineup. I think it's crazy for them to trade both of those guys. My assumption would be they would only trade one, and they would try to get some type of a package of win-now players that they can slide into their lineup because they have the clock ticking on them, as you have no idea if Paul Skeens would ever be open to signing a contract extension instead of eventually hitting the open market. So you have a really finite window. Because he won Rookie of the Year, I believe he also gained a year of service time. So you even have less time with Paul Skeens. Was it 5 years left, or is it 4 years after this, after he got that service time? Let me check on this really quickly because it would make even more sense. Paul Skeens will be a free agent 2031. So we got 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Oh, you still have 6 years. I thought he gained a year of control. Maybe that's not reflected, or maybe I'm wrong about that. Regardless, the clock's still ticking. Either way you look at it when it comes to your future with Paul Skeens. You got to be trying to win now. So I get that to some respect. But trading Jared Jones would be crazy to me. And if you really could get Jared Jones, I'd be all in on it. Okay. We all saw Jared Jones this past year where he was on that pitch count and he just completely carved the Mets. I can't remember how many innings he pitched. It was like 4 perfect innings where he just was striking at everybody. It was absolutely disgusting. The guy's got the top velocity, a fastball slider combination that's absolutely devastating. He did have some struggles throughout the year. Ultimately pitched to a 4.14 ERA in 22 starts and 121 and a third innings pitched. But again, you're talking about a 23-year-old with frontline potential, 5 years of control left for Jared Jones. I would absolutely kick the tires on trading for him. It doesn't make sense to me. And I can't even conceptualize what that trade would look like. How many pieces are you sending? What are they looking for? Are they just trying to fill out their lineup for next year? Does Acuna, trying to think of the guys that are big league ready, Acuna, Batty, Mauricio, like, do they just want a bunch of bats that can plug into their lineup and then also a prospect that's a little bit further down the line for the surplus value they're trading? Because again, for a clearly big league caliber starting pitcher in Jared Jones with 5 years of control, who's not going to hit arbitration for a couple more years, they should be getting a haul if they deal him. I just can't see any team meeting that asking price. I love it, but I just again, I have no idea what type of package to put forth to get a guy like Jared Jones. The other pitcher they're floating though is Mitch Keller. And Mitch Keller signed a 5-year, $77 million extension going into last year. He only made about $5.8 million this past season. So he's got 71.1.5 basically left over the next 4 years. His average annual salary comes out to $17.79 million, which is right in line with what starting pitchers of his caliber are getting paid on the open market. And you're getting his age 29 through 32 seasons. Not bad. But this past year, he pitched to a 4.25 ERA at 178 innings. Good, not great. He has been durable. I do like that side of it. I wouldn't want to necessarily give up a ton for Mitch Keller. To take on the contract, it's not a bad contract, but unless the Mets really feel like they can tap into an extra gear, and he is a guy that struck out 200 batters last season, 2023. So I'm not saying there's nothing there to Mitch Keller, but I would be hesitant to give up serious prospects in that type of a trade. We'll see, though. Here's the one that I think Mets fans would absolutely love. We've talked about it already this offseason, but now the Mariners are officially willing to listen on him. That's Luis Castillo. Luis Castillo is owed $24.15 million over the next 3 seasons as a vesting option for 2028 that will vest if he throws 180 innings in 2027, the final year of his deal. If he has a UCL injury, where he misses 130 plus days. So essentially, if he has Tommy John or the internal brace surgery, that 2028 option changes and becomes a $5 million team option. He also has a $1 million trade assignment bonus. And that says for 2025 through 2027. I don't know if that means he gets that $1 million trade assignment bonus if he's traded in those 3 years, or if it means he gets $1 million additional in salary for those 3 years. Either way, $25 million per. Luis Castillo is worth that. He's coming off 6 straight years now with a sub-4 ERA where he basically hasn't missed a start. You're not going to find a more durable, consistent starting pitcher than him. This past year, he made 30 starts, pitched to a 3.64 ERA, 175 in the third innings pitched, career 3.56 ERA. He turns 32 today. So happy birthday to Luis Castillo. This is a guy that you can pencil in as your ace next year. I mean, that's how good he has been throughout his career. Such a high floor. I'd be all in on Castillo in a way that I wasn't for Garrett Crochet, just because I feel more comfortable on the floor. Now, I wouldn't trade as much as the package that it took to get Crochet. I don't think you'd have to. You might have to give up a Jet Williams, though, or one of those top prospects. Again, Jet Williams, Carson Bench, Ryan Clifford. I really would try to hold on to Williams and Bench personally, but you got to give to get. And if this is your ace for the next 3 years, potentially the next 4 years, you have to consider it. I also would note that the Mariners need offense. And right now, if you go to roster resource on FanGraphs, their projected third baseman and second baseman, it's Dylan Moore at third and Ryan Bliss at second. So they need some infield help. That's a team that might look at Brett Batty and say, all right, well, we can plug him in at third base, see what happens. They might love Ronnie Mauricio as an option for their infield. They might look at Luis Angel Acuna and say, he can be our starting second baseman. And J.P. Crawford is 2 years away from free agency, coming off a bad year. He might be our shortstop. The Mets have some players that would interest the Mariners. What exactly the package would look like, how many of those guys would you have to give up? That's where the negotiation comes in. But there is definitely a trade fit here where the Mets could potentially swing a deal with the Mariners. And there's also, some major leaguers the Mets have that could interest the Mariners if you ate down salary. Now it becomes a very expensive trade if you, let's say, send Starling Marte to the Mariners and need half the contract and you take on Castillo. In that sense, it's sort of like a $35 million expenditure, taking in about $25 million and eating 10. But who knows? Maybe the Mariners would value a Starling Marte to just add another right-handed bat into the fold that could DH for them, play a little bit of outfield. Maybe they once wanted Jeff McNeil, Fredwin Diaz, and Robinson Cano. Maybe if you ate some money, you could flip McNeil there as part of a larger package. But if you're going to get Luis Castillo, you're going to have to give up some serious prospects to do it. But it could be worth it because, again, you are looking at one of the most durable starting pitchers in baseball, who's also one of the most effective. Only 32 years old. The next 3 years, I think, will be really good seasons for Castillo. And it's just a really nice ace that you can sort of set in there and know you're going to get really good production for next season and a couple years beyond that. So that's where the trade market is. I'm sure there's other starters that can move. I've talked about John Gray as a potential pitcher that could be on the move. Jesus Luzardo could definitely be traded as the Marlins are clearly open for business. There's an even wilder trade with the Marlins that I want to do a whole show on at some point. That's Sandy Alcantara coming off Tommy John. Would the Marlins consider pulling the trigger now? Considering they traded Jake Berger, I think anything is in the cards for the Marlins. But the Mets might decide to go to the trade market to address their rotation if the starting pitching market dries up on them. Freed off the board with Burns pretty much out of consideration. You never know how quickly Minaya, Flaherty, Pivetta, those guys come off, Walker Buehler, or all of a sudden you're left without any options, and then maybe trade is a more attractive way to get that starter. But there's also been some rumors that do fill into trades a little bit, but it comes to who the Mets could be shopping. So could the Mets actually trade Starling Marte? We'll talk about that in the next segment. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and they will get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL. It's all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page to place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and make sure that first bet is a winner because, again, you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date on all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 12,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, let's talk about some Mets that are potentially on the trade block. The Athletic reported today that the Mets are willing to absorb some of Starling Marte's salary in a trade. Marte is set to make $20.75 million in 2025 in the last year of his 4-year deal. Most teams are not going to take on that salary, but if the Mets eat it down, maybe they could find a home for him in a trade. But I'm still very curious what the market really is for Marte. Here's a guy that has not played over 120 games since 2019, who over the last 2 years hasn't even made it to 100 games played. And if you just look at the WAR totals, he was a negative WAR player in 2023. I think a lot of that was coming off the double groin surgery, was never right. But even this past year, him being healthy, and he did look good in the playoffs, he was worth 0.6 FWAR. I get why the Mets would want to move him. I don't know why a team would want to take on a 36-year-old outfielder, and for how much money would they be willing to bring him in for? If Starling Marte was a free agent, what would he be getting on the market? I don't know. I mean, Michael Conforto got $17 million as an outfielder, but he's a lot younger, was a lot more productive last year, a lot healthier. I think at most Marte'd get $10 million, and that's where I think you'd have to eat this contract down to. I think you'd have to eat half or even more than half. And then what are you getting? Are you getting a reliever out of it? Is that worth it just to clear Marte? If you do, granted, there is more plate appearances available that keeps DH more open. So if you wanted to, you could sign a Jock Peterson. Maybe you wanted to, I'm trying to think who else would fit the sort of bat first mold. But Jesse Winker, bringing Jesse Winker back, right? It gives you some options, absolutely. You are really covered in the outfield now. Juan Soto and Brandon Nimmo are everyday players. Center field, you got Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor. And I doubt the Mets would ever even get to an outfield where they'd put Marte and right and Soto and left and Nimmo and center. I just can't see that happening. So Marte is either going to be a DH or he might, get a little bit of time in right field when you want to get Soto off his feet and have him DH, or maybe you'd put Marte in left a little bit of times to get him off his feet. But for the most part, he would be your fifth, sixth outfielder, sort of, right? I guess fifth. Jeff McNeil can slide into the outfield. You have Batty, who they might want to slide into the outfield a little bit. You have Acuna, who could play some center. Drew Gilbert's on his way. So it does make some sense to clear some money off the books and clear a spot on the roster because he is such an injury-plagued player. I just don't know who you're going to trade him to. And ultimately, if you have to eat $15 million of the deal just to move it, at that point, is it better to just hang on to him as depth? Because, knock on wood, let's just say Nimmo's hurt next year. You might be happy you have Starling Marte, or Marte might thrive in a DH role where he's not even focused on the outfield at all. He's just able to hit. We did see him swing the bat well in the playoffs. He is a veteran. He also seems to be pretty close to Juan Soto, so I feel like he might be a player that would really be appreciated in that clubhouse. I know he already was prior to that. He was one of the leaders of the Mets. So I understand the appetite for trading him. I just don't know. I can't envision the trade fit. The only one that came to mind is Jordan Montgomery from the Diamondbacks. Kind of a bad money for bad money trade. Jordan Montgomery is owed $22.5 million. Marte, 20 and 20, was it $20.75 million? So it's only a couple $1 million difference, not even. I think the Diamondbacks would want more financial relief. So maybe you eat $5 million of his salary. So they get, a little bit of a buffer, some money that they can reinvest or just clear some money off their books. And you slide him into their outfield mix, DH mix. They're probably going to lose Jock Peterson and Real Grichuk. So they might just say, all right, Marte's our DH, and be cool with it because they're just happy to get Montgomery off their books. The Mets could look at Montgomery as a real reclamation project. That's one that makes a little bit of sense. It would also be a return to Arizona for Marte, who started 2020 with the Diamondbacks, never played in front of fans, obviously. Then got traded to the Marlins. They got traded to the Athletics before the Mets signed him. That's an option. But ultimately, I still am a little bit wary about the idea of the Mets being able to find a suitor for Starling Marte. The question is, though, if you're going to eat money on Marte, are you willing to eat money on Jeff McNeil and try to trade him? I did an entire show on Jeff McNeil and why I believe he's going to play out his contract for the Mets. So you can go back and watch that because I really get more in depth on this. I think the difference between Marte and McNeil and why the Mets might be more willing to eat down Marte's contract and more quick to move him over McNeil is because Jeff McNeil gives you two things Starling Marte does not. He gives you durability. He has played at least 120 games every single year of his career outside of his rookie season when he debuted late and the COVID year in 2020. Other than that, he has largely been healthy, and he still is a productive player because of his versatility. Last couple of years, as bad as he has been with the bat, a 1.3 WAR total in 2024, a 2.4 WAR total in 2023. He did come on in the second half offensively. That gives you a little bit of hope. I think right now he's your starting second baseman, and he has a lot more opportunities to get on the field and help the Mets plug a lot of holes. So I think that's why the Mets aren't necessarily shopping Jeff McNeil. There was a team that was really in on it, possibly, but I feel like McNeil is going to be a Met next year. The last guy to talk about when it comes to potential players on the block is Brett Batty. The Mets have been getting calls on Brett Batty. That is how that was reported. It's not the Mets are shopping him. It's the Mets are fielding calls. That means there's teams that see the writing on the wall with Mark Fiantos being the Mets third baseman. They're saying, you know what? Let's just try to see if we can get a former top 20 prospect in baseball and maybe a change of scenery. We can tap into something. You look at some of the batted ball data in the minor leagues for Brett Batty. He still hits the ball really hard. He just has to elevate. He added versatility. I would get why there is a market for Brett Batty. The question is, what are teams willing to give up? Because they're trying to buy low. So you have to really think about what type of trade Batty can go in. There's a couple that make sense to me. One of them is using him in a larger package as a sort of buy low sweetener. So if the Mets had traded for a Crochet, having Batty be the third piece in that trade. If they traded for Luis Castillo, same thing. Where Brett Batty is this piece that a team that might be contending and have a spot at third base, they might say, you know what, we can try him out to start the year, put him in a competition with whatever incumbents we have. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But we're also getting the top prospects that really move the needle to trade a Castillo or what other pitcher that the Mets might be in on. The other type of trade that makes sense would be flipping him for somebody else's problem. So one name that jumped out to me, and I don't even know if I would do it, but Forrest Whitley is a former top prospect that was top 100 across the board. At one point, I think he was as high as top 5 in Major League Baseball as a pitching prospect. He's with the Astros. He pitched last year to a 1.89 ERA in AAA, struck out 45 batters in 33 1/3 innings pitched. He's 6'7", throws really hard, has a good curveball. That's a reliever with complete control of his service time. The Astros are probably going to have to replace Alex Bregman if he signs elsewhere. That's one where I could just see a 1-for-1 swap. Mets clear Batty, sent him to a new destination. He needs a change of scenery. Forrest Whitley needs a change of scenery. Slots into the Mets bullpen potentially. Only thing that I wouldn't like about that is it doesn't appear like Whitley has any options left. And honestly, I think that would be a deal breaker for me because if you're the Mets, you can't just give him a bullpen spot. So it's not necessarily the perfect trade, but just something of that ilk where you are getting somebody else's failed prospect and it's a swap like that. One last Batty trade to keep your eye on, just something that I thought of today. I could see Brett Batty going to the Brewers in a Devin Williams trade because the Brewers also need a third baseman. Joey Ortiz is going to slide over to shortstop to replace Willy Adames. Third base is vacant. So Batty makes some sense. I think Tyler McGill makes some sense because they already have a ton of have had a ton of success with Trevor McGill, Tyler McGill's brother. So maybe they look at Tyler and say, potential starter. Maybe we can get more out of him in the bullpen, whatever it is. And then you got to give a real prospect to get a deal done. But a trade that would allow the Brewers to plug a couple of holes on the cheap, plus get a blue chipper for Devin Williams, whether that is Jet Williams, Ryan Clifford, Carson Benj. I wouldn't trade Benj. I don't think I would trade Williams either. Jet Williams, that is. But I would trade Ryan Clifford. I would trade Drew Gilbert plus another prospect potentially. Devin Williams as the Mets' 8th inning guy would be absolutely disgusting. Having Edwin Diaz and Devin Williams, that changes the Mets as a contender. So I'd be willing to trade a real prospect, give up on a couple guys that are on the outs in the Mets roster anyway. That makes some sense to me. Bottom line with all the trade stuff, look out for Marte, Batty, potentially McNeil getting moved. I'd also say Paul Blackburn, Tyler McGill, or Jose Budo could also be on the block a little bit just because everybody needs pitching right now, and those guys are cheap potential starting pitchers. Are they going to swing a deal themselves? Not necessarily, but there could be something worked out in some of these trades where those guys would have some value. Prospects who I think will be most available, Acuna right now, Drew Gilbert, Mauricio, maybe a Nolan McLean or a Blade Tidwell. The untouchables for me, the guys that I wouldn't want to see the Mets trade, again, Williams, Benj, Clifford, ideally, again, unless you're getting an ace, I want to hang on to those guys. And also, I'd say in the pitching front, Brendan Sproat, Jonah Tong are the pitchers that I would hope the Mets hold on to. But we'll see. It does feel like the Mets are pretty active right now in the trade market. They're active on at every single phase of the market. So they could make any move at this point, but they're going to sort of clear the deck for the next day here as Juan Soto is getting announced. And we are going to talk about that a little bit in the next segment. Soto has a presser today. We'll also touch on the Rule 5 draft, what happened there. Before we get to it, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And GameTime Picks will make it easier for you to get tickets for your favorite live events because that feature will filter out the fluff and show you only the best possible deals on great seats. So don't waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. You can find the best offers there. You click them, you can view your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect before you arrive. And when you download the GameTime app today, you can create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? It's game time. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks from the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, Wednesday was the Rule 5 draft. The Mets did not pick anybody in the major league portion, but they lost a couple of arms. Mike Vasil got drafted by the Phillies, was later traded to the Rays. Nate Lavender got drafted by the Rays. So the Rays really like Mets pitching. Vasil this past year pitched to a 6.04 ERA across 134 innings pitched. Again, Phillies took him, traded him to the Rays. He has to stay in the Rays roster all year for Tampa to retain him. Otherwise, he'll be returned back to the Mets. And that's the active roster. Now, if he gets hurt, then they can stash him on the IL, which is exactly what they're doing with Nate Lavender. Lavender got Tommy John surgery this past year. I would imagine he could come back at some point at the end of the season out of the Rays bullpen, at which point, once he's healthy, he would have to be on the active roster. But for now, they draft him. They go into spring training with him. They eventually put him on the 60-day IL, and then they just have him chilling there. And if it gets to the end of the season and Nate Lavender never pitches because he was hurt the whole year, they get to keep his services moving forward. So I think the Nate Lavender one hurts more than Vasil just because, it's more realistic to expect that he is gone for good. Also, anyone who's listened to this show for a while knows I'm not a big fan of Mike Vasil as a pitching prospect anyway, so I didn't really lose sleep over it. In fact, I wouldn't say happy that I got picked because the Mets get nothing out of it, but I don't know. I guess there's part of me that sort of smiled and thought, well, at least Don Hamill didn't get selected. All right, so Juan Soto. Today is his presser, 3 p.m. It's going to be streamed. I might go live after it. I am going on, what's the podcast? I apologize, John Saponaro, that I don't know the exact name of your show. Is it Till Mets Do Us Part? Is that what it's called? I think it is. Anyway, I'm going on their show today, so I got to see the timing of it all. But if I do have time between when the presser ends and I gather my thoughts, I will go live on YouTube to just break down everything, and it is Till Mets Do Us Part. To just break down everything that we learned from the Juan Soto presser. It's going to be a lot of fun to see him put on that Mets uniform. It's a crazy day, and they're selling jerseys 10 o'clock in the morning, I believe, in the team store at Citi Field. So you can head over there, get your Juan Soto jersey fresh off the presses. He will be wearing number 22. That was a little bit of a story during the winter meetings, the fact that there is a new rule in the CBA that if a player is going to take another player's number who is still on the roster, they have to buy out the inventory, which could be like $225,000, I think was the last time somebody had done it. That's how much it cost. Juan Soto's got plenty to cover that. So I'm sure there was no sweat in it. But yeah, that was one of the things where we weren't sure if he was going to be number 22 or not. He is number 22. We're going to see him talk to the media. And they also have his contract details on Spot Track now. And it is an absolutely insane deal. We knew it was, but I really thought that the $75 million signing bonus was going to come out of his $51 million in salary over the first 5 years. What do I mean by that? A signing bonus is calculated in the total guarantee of the contract. So $765 million, 75 of it is the signing bonus, $690 million of it is the actual salary. The average annual value is taking the entire guaranteed contract, dividing it by 15. That is how you get what the luxury tax number is going to be. But in a given year, a player might be making less money. A lot of times teams might backload a contract. So yes, a perfect example, Jeff McNeil, 4 years, $50 million. The luxury tax hit stays the same at $12.5 million per, but for the next 2 years, the last couple of years of the deal, his salary jumps to $15.75 million. So he's getting more than his luxury tax hit, but earlier he was getting less than his luxury tax hit. So with all that said, I thought Juan Soto's contract was going to be $36 million a year for the first 5 years of the deal, $75 million signing bonus. So every single year was going to be $51 million, essentially. You're taking that $75 million signing bonus, dividing it by 5, and then you're removing $15 million of salary for the first 5 years. That's not how they did it. Juan Soto for 2025 will be paid by Steve Cohen $121,875,000 because he's going to get the $75 million signing bonus right now, just got it, and he gets $46,875,000 in salary in 2025. That's the same number that he'll get in 2026, 2028, and 2029. 2027, for whatever reason, he's getting $42.5 million. That might be the year that Edwin Diaz makes the most on his contract. I don't know if that's why they structured it the way they did. But the bottom line is Juan Soto, through the first 5 years of his deal, before his opt-out, will make $305 million overall. That's $61 million per year if you just divide it out. Final 10 years of the deal, he's owed $460 million. So $46 million per is what he's going to make. And that one seemed to be pretty flat, 46 every single year. There is that kicker in the contract. If he opts out, the Mets can opt in, bump his salary up $4 million. So then he'd be a $50 million player. It'd be 10 years, $500 million. It's insane. It is. And we're going to hear all about how the Mets swayed him in this presser. Here's what I want to sort of tell you about this contract. And also, there's bonuses too for MVP. $500K if he wins it the first time, $1 million every other MVP after that. Gets $350K if he finishes second, $150K if he finishes third through fifth. Full no trade clause. That's all the details. But just as we look back and as we've read all the different reporting about what happened with Juan Soto, I don't believe this idea that Juan Soto was thinking about the Yankees and the Mets gave him that contract at the end that pushed him over the top. I think this entire time, from the very beginning, Juan Soto and Scott Boras knew where he was going. They knew the New York Mets would be the highest bidder. I think Steve Cohen made that evident in the early stage of this process. And it put Steve Cohen at the palm of Scott Boras' hands to get the Mets to overpay hundreds of millions of dollars. And I don't think it's wrong to do, okay? Juan Soto is an investment towards legitimizing the Mets franchise. It's worth every penny to Steve Cohen, despite how crazy the cost is. But that process for Juan Soto, it was like an auction for a piece of art where the dealer knows, and the dealer is Scott Boras, that he has a bidder that will top any bid. So you get everyone blind bidding. You drive up the price that way. The Blue Jays did a great job of that. The Red Sox, the Yankees. You get the buyer who wants him desperate. There's been some reports that Steve Cohen left their last meeting and he wasn't confident the Mets are going to land him. All the way up through Friday, as Andy Martino reported, into Saturday, it seemed like he was going to the Yankees. I don't think that was ever the case. I really don't. I think it was all to get Steve Cohen to a desperate place and get the most player-friendly, absurd contract in MLB history. And so Juan Soto is going to get $121+ million this year. But for the Mets, Juan Soto is going to be in your starting lineup. You have one of the best hitters in the game, and you have a chance to change that little brother narrative and make the New York Mets a premier destination for years to come. And as they continue to play in this market, let's just say Roki Sasaki is looking at his possibilities. We talked about him on yesterday's show. You can check that whole episode out where I talked about the Japanese phenom. The Mets are more attractive because they have Juan Soto. And they will be more attractive to players moving forward because they landed Juan Soto. It's a crazy investment into the Mets' future, but I think that's how it all came together. And we're going to learn more during the presser today. Again, my plan is to potentially go live after that. If not, it might just be Friday's episode of Locked On Mets. Until then, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell if you want to be notified whenever I go live. You want to follow me on X, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.